right, so good morning. As Wesley said, my name is Marquita Fornoff, and I cover arts and culture for the Fort Worth Report. It's only 2.5 years old, so if you don't know who we are, don't feel bad. But we're a nonprofit local newsroom, and you can subscribe to our work for free. Pretty good deal, in my opinion. So now that that's out of the way, I want to acknowledge that if you're here, you probably are already a fan of the arts, and you're likely a creator yourself. And you don't need me to remind you of the intrinsic value that arts inherently have in terms of free speech, expression, understanding the world, and each other. But today, in a data-driven world, it's also important to put some numbers up on the board. So I have a panel of 4 very wise, highly engaged, and extremely talented guests to help us have this conversation. So first, I want to introduce Taylor Hardy. She is the Associate Film Commissioner and Senior Marketing Manager at Visit Fort Worth. Welcome. Next is Megan Henderson, Director of Communications and Events at the Near Southside Inc. And Brandy Waller-Pace is the creator and organizer of the Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival, and she's also the executive director at the nonprofit Decolonizing the Music Room. And last but certainly not least is Ariel Davis. She is an artist, art consultant, and advocate based here in Fort Worth. And if you haven't seen it already, she currently has a show called Cerulean Dreams over at the Basement Lounge. Welcome. Okay, so Taylor, we're going to start with you because the Fort Worth Film Commission, Mayor Maddie Parker, Representative Craig Goldman, Red Sanders, and many other leaders in town have worked really hard to boost state incentive funding in this past session. In the last budget cycle for the 2-year biennium, the amount of money dedicated to this program was $50 million. With the work of this team, it has quadrupled to $200 million. Yeah. So, other than having the star power of Taylor Sheridan and help from, David Glasser, what do you think made that campaign in Austin so successful?
I think the relationships with our local legislatives are really important. We're constantly in communication with Mayor Parker and our elected officials. Robert Stearns from the Economic Development Office is amazing and a huge champion for film. So we invite them as often as we can to come to our mixers and just see the community and the people that are, we're creating full-time jobs and business, and it's impacting us on an economic level in so many different sectors, not just the salaries of cast and crew. Hotels and catering companies and retail companies, everyone's impacted by film. So we try to really educate our officials about that and invite them to come out to a set and see all of that taking place.
Yeah, and so Megan, I know that you are familiar with traveling down to Austin and talking with legislators as well. You've talked at probably a billion local city council meetings.
Rounding just up, maybe.
Approximately, And, I think you have done an amazing job of not only telling people about the arts and culture and what it can do for the city, but also getting them excited for it. I would love to hear what your strategy is.
I think you have to have real conversations with the people that you plan to speak on behalf of. And so if you want to get people excited, you have to ask them honestly, what are the challenges you face? What are the hopes that you have? With that treasure trove of information, it's easy to speak about the arts and about the needs for funding or support or advocacy or policy change because it comes from such a sincere place. You're not pontificating, you're not imagining what the situation is. You're speaking from the direct firsthand experience of an artist or from an arts professional or from an arts adjacent industry that is impacted by the economic impact of arts. And so for me, I feel like the more that I talk to artists, the more that I show up to really organic art experiences where creative things are happening, it becomes easier and easier to speak publicly. When you come from sort of the perspective of like, I think I know about something, it becomes very difficult to speak because you're always kind of at the edge of maybe not your full firsthand experience. And so I think just showing up to things, have real experiences with artists, have honest conversations, invite them to tell you what's wrong, which is sometimes hard to hear, and then you can speak much more confidently about the situation.
Yeah, and so, Brandy, we'll pass the mic over to you. So I know that you have had experience as a teacher, a full-time teacher before, and now you still do a lot of work as an educator. And, you know, a lot of schools are facing tight budgets, and one of the first things to go when they're, you know, making those cuts is frequently to the arts. I'm curious about how you feel you've been able to make the case that, you know, not only is it something that should not be cut, but is worth investing in for the next generation of students. So I would love to hear more about how you frame that message.
Yeah, so I taught in Fort Worth ISD for 10 years, and one thing that we've been really fortunate in is that they invest very heavily in the arts. They have class time tied to other essential things throughout the day so that the issue isn't as much will it exist, it's how will it exist. And so a lot of my work is convincing people that, you know, we say the arts are good because they raise math scores or they raise reading comprehension, but the arts are valuable on their own merit. And and also I have to say, I have to put on my like nerd researcher hat. That is statistically specious, a claim anyway. And so it's really getting people to understand that it's not about just we've secured the time, we've secured the space, whatever happens, happens. But what is it that is enhancing the arts and understanding that it's part of being a whole human and what its value is in terms of understanding the whole of humanity. So it's not just one story, just one method, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with what's going on in the schools, but the standardized testing has started to encroach into that time, even on the elementary level. So talking a lot to not just educators, but arts administrators about why those things are not the most important things and why everyone got into this because they know that the arts are important on their own, but it's really easy to lose sight of that when you're deep in an educational system. So that's why I'm outside of it now. You can say a lot more outside of it, and I am privileged in that I can help push the needle from the outside and not feel like I'm in that teacher-torn space where I have to watch my position so much that I can't say certain things. And we try to speak for those who don't have that leeway.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the benefit of being your own boss, which Ariel knows all about.
Hello.
Ariel, you've opened your own gallery. You've worked, you know, a ton with Art Space 111. I'm sure people know you from there. You teamed up with a colleague for 111 Consulting.
Yes.
And you're an artist yourself.
Yes.
So I think that sometimes people forget that when we are talking about small businesses, we're also talking about artists.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
And it's not just you individually that is benefiting from your small business. Your business feeds a lot of other businesses in the city, in the area, and I would love if you could kind of help us illustrate that through talking about, you know, some of your big clients. Like I know you have work at Globe Life Field, you know, Metro or Trinity Metro,
Yeah.
the Fort Worth Stock Show and Rodeo. Like you've worked at all of those places.
Well, I mean, I think that that's complex in that in my 10 or 12 years since I've graduated from UT, I've really put an emphasis on trying as many different things as I could, whether that's applying to juried exhibitions or, you know, really feeling out art festivals or really just trying everything that I possibly could to see what maybe would be the best fit. And I also have painted murals and done some larger projects, which I love, but I always kind of come back to working in the studio. And I guess that's kind of where it all comes from. And I think that being there, you spend a lot of time by yourself, actually. But, you are working with, I
would always go and like shop at Azel. So like, you know, that's an outlet there. And then partnering with different arts organizations like Art Tooth, or, you know, being a member of the Fort Worth Art Collective, where, you know, we're not necessarily represented by galleries, so we have to go out and, you know, really create relationships to collaborate with different organizations. And for example, like the show I have now, Cerulean Dreams, at the Basement Lounge, it's a great place to show your work, but it also in some way helps them create revenue for their business. So there's a great symbiosis that happens in that way, especially when there are creative collaborations between artists and arts organizations and businesses.
Yeah, and so Megan brought up the challenges and some of those barriers facing artists in the city, and you have to. It's not always fun, but you have to you have to acknowledge them.
Yeah.
So I'd love if you could start with what some of those barriers you have found to be.
I think one of the greatest barriers that I find is that when we speak about the arts, we speak about them with emotional language, and we often leave out the opportunity to talk about arts as businesses, the economic impact of arts to our local economy. This is not just national numbers, but we're talking about the number of people who are employed, the number of arts-adjacent businesses that financially benefit from arts programming, and the resources that creative professionals need. And so my direct experience is in talking to artists as small business owners, and encouraging artists to think of themselves as entrepreneurs and sometimes as self-employed peoples, but also as people who, in their individual approach to art, whatever it is, whether it's performing arts or visual arts, to kind of begin to quantify in your head the economic impact of your own professional practice, and to speak confidently as an advocate for that. Because I think at the political level, it all comes down to what pencils out on paper a lot of times, as much as I would hope that that's not the case. I think that when you're having conversations with elected officials and leaders and policymakers, they often want you to talk about the impact. And Wesley did a great job in his presentation of sort of showing some of those numbers. I think what the biggest problem is that as artists, we need to, and I'm not an artist, I would like to be clear, I have very little artistic talent. But as an arts community, as an arts ecosystem, we need to do a greater job of talking about maybe the less sexy version of what arts are. It's not always the cultural impact of the arts, it's also the economic impact. And so having that conversation creates more energy and creates more space and more funding and better policy at the local level for arts professionals to have a more robust career, and hopefully to work as arts professionals full time and to not have 3 or 4 other jobs and juggling all of the demands, because I think that impacts the quality of the art as well. If you are not able to fully dedicate yourself to your practice as a professional, if I had to be a nonprofit community organizer in my spare time, I would do a pretty crummy job of it, I'll tell you that. I just wouldn't have any spare time. And so expecting arts professionals to operate like that, I think, is unfair. And so the way to, in my mind, resolve that is to have some dollars and cents conversations about the impact of arts.
Mm-hmm. I'm not convinced you have any spare time currently.
No,
but
I don't.
But
You're
but
looking
I
at
hear
it.
you. I hear
Thank you, Marky. I appreciate it.
And so, Taylor, I want to ask you about the barriers that you all have faced as well, because as successful as the Film Commission has been, it didn't always exist. In a lot of ways, you guys have built this from the ground up, and there's really not a roadmap to follow. So I'd love if you could talk about some of those challenges and how you all have been addressing them.
Yeah, we were founded about 8 years ago. Before that, Dallas was managing all of the business in Fort Worth, which obviously was not very successful. And we are housed under Visit Fort Worth, which was really helpful for us because we already had these relationships with location owners and attractions, and we're able to use those as filming locations and really quickly be able to showcase new places. And it's all around town, not just concentrated in one district or neighborhood. So I think it's just been really cool to see it build in the past couple years. And I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
That's all right. It's hard when a bunch of people are looking at you, but you can ignore them for a moment and talk about what your strategy has been, because the city has really invested in this program, which, as Megan said, that's not always easy to get government entities to do, because they want those numbers, and it's hard to show them impact numbers when you're building.
Right, yeah. Well, and we do have some great numbers I did want to share today. Since we were founded about 8 years ago, the Film Commission has generated $555 million in economic impact and created 19,000 jobs. We are pulling a lot of those numbers from the Texas Film Commission. We did talk a little bit about our state incentive program, which does require local and state spend and local hires. So we can see that direct economic impact, and we're able to use that to advocate for more. We were also discussing the barriers to film production. So I think that 3 things that are really important are having a strong workforce, which we do. We have about 3.5 crews deep in DFW, which means we can handle about 3.5 productions at the same time. We're working to grow that so we can accommodate more filming. You also need your strong locations, which we have, your incentives, and then your infrastructure. So studio spaces, that's something that we've had a lot of interest in building in Fort Worth, but not something that we currently have right now, at least not the size that we need for some of these bigger productions. So I think that it is working with the city to find a way to make it more accessible to build that here and finding the right location, and that will really change things for us moving forward.
Can I add something to Taylor?
Of course.
I remember when the Film Commission was first organizing at the very beginning of this story, and the truth is there was so little money dedicated to the effort. It was sort of like a good idea, but if you can get it done on the scraps of what we offer you. And I think there should be real credit given to Visit Fort Worth and the early film crew that said, fine, we'll take whatever you'll give us, and we're going to make the best of it, and we're going to prove you wrong on whether this is the right thing to invest in. And I find that is kind of a trademark of artists, to take, in some ways, the opportunity that exists, the tiny little crack of light through the door, and to find a way to barrel your way through. And I think that's what the Film Commission did. It's true of, I think, all of us probably at some point have sort of said, that's not the ideal thing I want. Like, I may not start a festival with all the funding that I need. Like, Brandy has worked so hard for the Fort Worth African American Roots Festival to prove the concept by just taking what she was given and finding the relationships she could for the people who had the right level of investment and faith, and then proving everyone else who did not believe in that dream wrong. And so as professionals, I think you have to have a follow-up plan, which is what Visit Fort Worth has done so successfully with the Fort Worth Film Commission, to say, if we start with 10% of what we need, then 90 days from now, we're gonna tell you what we did with the 10% you gave us, and then 1 year mark later, we're gonna have a pretty robust report on what opportunities were missed because you did not fund what we told you we needed. And so I think that type of feedback loop is really critical. Sometimes it's easy to get settled into what you're given, and because it is kind of an exhausting job, to lose sight of those benchmark moments where you go back and say, here's what I should have had, here's what we missed, here's what we need for tomorrow. I think that job that Taylor has done is just so impressive, because it's what's created policy change and true investment back into the film program, because she reserved a portion of the program's funding to produce data and to track that data. And that's not very exciting. Brandy probably gets excited by data more than I. I'm not a data person, but yeah. But I think, to say like, well, if we only have $100,000 to start with, and reserving $8,000 of that $100,000 to have someone on the research side tracking some things, man, it feels like such a kick in the shins. But the truth is, it is what delivers the $1 million impact that you need later. So kudos to you. Sorry, I've stolen your mic.
No. Well, and I did want to mention, too, in the beginning, we really started small. It was one scene in a movie with someone like David Lowery, who's a Dallas-based director and worked on Disney's Pete's Dragon and some really amazing films. And he was looking for a construction pit. So we were able to use our resources and partners like Megan and Becky with Downtown Fort Worth, Inc., and find this construction pit, an active construction pit, where they were able to film this one scene, which they ended up using as the main photo to promote the whole film. And from that, we had David Lowery come back for multiple films. So it was Never Going Back. His wife's film with Augustine Frizzell was the director, and he executive produced. Old Man and the Gun filmed in Fort Worth. Even the Night film, A Green Night, came back for a few scenes. So it's just really cool to see those relationships and how important they are to help us build the film community here.
Yeah, and to Megan's point, the Film Commission has also been able to point to some of those opportunities that were missed. And I think it'd be interesting if you could talk about some of the films or productions that were interested in coming here but didn't, or ones that did successfully film here, but it was shaky for a minute.
Yeah. Well, one that still bums me out is Killers of the Flower Moon. They came to scout all of Texas, and we lost it to Oklahoma. They had a really strong incentive that lured them there, and obviously that was a multi-million-dollar production with Leonardo DiCaprio and will be coming out soon. But a great success story. It was 12 Mighty Orphans. They were also courted by Oklahoma, but it was really important to us to keep that in Fort Worth, particularly because it was a Fort Worth story. So we really advocated for that and worked with our state and local representatives, and we were able to keep them here just by the skin of our teeth. But it's been such great PR for Fort Worth, and to be able to host that film's premiere here, which never happens outside of LA and New York, was just huge for us.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I want to pass the mic over to Brandy, because you also built something out of nothing, and which is a very hard thing to do on top of all of your other responsibilities and duties. And other than sheer force of will, I want to know what helped you accomplish building the Roots Music Festival.
So our first year was virtual because of the shutdown, and I'm also a musician. Part of my performance practice is within the old time and trad music community, and so it was really people from elsewhere that made that first year happen, because nobody here really understood what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. And can you hold your mic just a little
yeah,
closer?
yeah.
I want people to hear all the good stuff you're saying.
Yeah, nobody really understood what the festival was, what the character of it was. People still don't really know what I mean by old time music. It's still like a bit niche. And so it was people from elsewhere, with the exception of Shiny Box Pictures, who worked with us to produce the first year. And if you look at Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival on YouTube, you'll see that first year. Do not go to the end, because I'm performing, and just don't do it. Don't do it. Just watch until I say bye, and then just like turn it off. But that was a reason that we were really able to be successful, and because I've been gigging in old time spaces and talking to a lot of people, just having, professional and friend relationships with others. There were people who understood, what space the festival was filling and kind of how festivals work. I will say there has never been a point at which we have had the funding to, we've never had all the funding. And I say we. Okay, so nonprofit. One thing I really dislike about dealing with nonprofits is that you have to appear to be resourced in order for people to consider you worthy of resourcing. I am the only staff person that did the festival last year. There's not staff. I was able to bring someone in the day of to be like a day of person, but there's literally no other staff, and we don't have take home when the festival's over, and we have to fill in the gap. The community has yet to fully invest in the festival, even though those who are familiar with the significance of it are very appreciative, and we have people from the community coming in and being appreciative, but the community has yet to fully invest. Yeah. When you asked about challenges, I was like, can I talk about challenges?
Oh, I knew you'd have some good answers, so I'm happy to let you keep going on that tangent.
Yeah. So first, I'll position myself. I run the festival, founded and run the nonprofit, and it's more music ed and other academic disciplines based. And I'm also a gigging musician. In my experience as a gigging musician and talking to others, Fort Worth has yet to understand what adequate pay is for gigging musicians, and there's no transparency around it. So I hear a lot of talk about economic impact outside of artists, but artists ourselves, I had one person, and this is a pretty normal thing, reach out to me about performing at an event and asked what my rate would be and said, oh, I don't have anything near that. I asked someone's advice, and they said that like $50 an hour was reasonable. Are there any musicians here? Any music? Yeah, there's like not even, almost a little bit, not even. And so like we pay a lot of lip service to featuring artists, featuring musicians, valuing arts, but the pay is not. There's no understanding of what actual artist pay should be. Part of the reason that the budget is so hard for the festival is that our organizational values are to pay adequate artist pay, which is doesn't sound sexy to fund. Thank you. But when I'm talking to people about that, they don't actually care about the artist getting paid well. They care about what benefit can be to them, what looks really splashy, and we can't survive like that. I also notice our nonprofit's mission is centered around Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian folks. My personal ideologies are very heavily like decolonial, anti-racist, abolitionist leaning. And we can't talk about resources and economy in our community without talking about racial and ethnic disparities. People don't see white faces with my organization, so they don't fund it. The mission is specifically toward racially minoritized people. They don't fund it, and it's backed by data. You can see specifically to Black femme nonprofit leaders, the disparity in funding. And as y'all know, we just had a very splashy example of how the community funds for Giving Tuesday, and it felt like the biggest sign of where the community's funding priorities are not. And it's not, we drive and we see the wonderful billboards and things. There are not faces that look like mine when people are promoting Fort Worth to other cities. And so part of what we're doing here locally is getting people to understand the entire community. And the challenge I've had yet to figure out is I'm not a panderer. It's not in my nature. How do I get a mostly white city, speaking like adult ages, that has a very old conservative streak to understand that like our lives are worth resourcing and our endeavors are worth resourcing? I have not seen how to do that yet. And I say conservative, but it falls around the whole thing, Fort Worth sits on a pile of money. But if you're Black and you ask where it is, nobody knows. And then they produce their event with 4 times more money than my nonprofit has ever seen ever. And until we're able to talk frankly about that, about artist pay, about racial ethnic disparities, about income disparities, we're not gonna make any difference, and we're gonna talk about the economic gains. Like I said, I'm the only person running the festival. I'm the only person running a nonprofit. I do not make a living off of it. My living is trying to do gigs and doing speaking gigs, presenting jobs and stuff like that. I have yet to have that level of resource where I can make a living off the several jobs that I do that you can write off on paper, and it is, I don't have a word for it, it's a very strong word, to see the level of resource other nonprofits have. Like you talked about money for a data person. There's not a data person. So I can't produce the things to get through the gate. And other nonprofits, small nonprofits that are racially minoritized I talk to, they can't produce the things to get through the gate. And whether we want to acknowledge it or not, even the implicit bias of looking at someone who looks like me and what happens when you decide whether or not it's like worthy of being part of this economic development that we have, it has to be addressed because it isn't currently.
Mm-hmm. And I want to pause for 1 minute here, because when you're talking about your values of we pay artists and we are going to pay them well, which I think, you're speaking to the choir in this particular situation. But that is especially challenging when you are bootstrapped, from the jump, but also when you're trying to make that programming accessible to the people who don't typically have access to it, or who typically don't get to see people who look like them up on the stage, or talking about playing the banjo and all of those things. So I want to pause and have you go a little bit deeper into that, because that's a very strategic move you made, and it's I understand why you did it, but I also think it's worth acknowledging how hard that is. Yeah.
So for example, we can't do a free festival. It's not a high price, but we can't do a free festival. I remember our first in-person year, somebody emailed the organization and was like, I would love to come, but I can only come for a couple of hours, and whatever the price was, like $45 is too much for me coming for a couple of hours. So the headliners for that year were a Grammy Award winner, a Steve Martin Banjo Award winner, and a Juno Award nominee that were not worth $45 for 2 hours. So it's, it's that kind of thing that can be a challenge. So we try to keep good pricing. It can't be free. It's not a corporate-based festival. It is a nonprofit institution. But when we speak to accessibility, for example, our goal is to have ASL interpreters and to have people who can help assist those who are low sight and blind, et cetera, et cetera. And so that kind of thing impacts the accessibility as well. And that is where some of the partnership stuff has to come into play, where I'm able to strategize. But again, one person doing all the jobs, it just depends. I feel like we've done okay, but always better. So like this year, I've done enough research to know how to get ASL interpreters in, get students in, and do that far enough in advance that it won't be something that, is missing at the end. But I lost track of the question.
Well, that's okay. I'll give you a minute to get back on that track and ask Ariel a question, because Ariel, you and I have talked several times about one of the questions I ask almost every artist I speak to is, what does it take to have a thriving arts community here in Fort Worth? And one of the things that I know you and I have talked about is building a patron base.
Yes, I mean, that I think is something that I talk about with a lot of people, and a lot of that
And
comes
I'm going to ask
from-
you to hold your mic
yeah,
a little bit higher.
we've talked about that, and I talk about that with a lot of people, and I think it's just constantly just trying to raise awareness of what is happening, and in the city as far as arts. I mean, I come at it from a visual arts background, and so we're specifically looking at finding people that care or showing them why maybe they should care and invest in art, either through memberships, through things, or by directly purchasing works and adding to their collections. And I think it's just it's so complex, I think, and how you get people to do that. But I think Megan's doing a great job with Arts Goggle near Southside's doing a great job with that, and raising awareness about artists that are in the city. I mean, Arts Fort Worth and the Community Arts Center does a great job of that. Art Tooth, and just I think as people that care about the arts, it is our responsibility in some way to share those things and to form relationships with people where we can and find allies and just try and help spread the word about what we're doing. And I was talking to Wesley before the panel, and how in the 10 years that I've been doing this, in Fort Worth, that we've been doing so much and things have changed, but maybe they haven't changed that much. And so I think we still have a long ways to go as far as, compared to other cities, how we get funding for the arts. And I think that, compared to other cities, tax funding isn't there as much as others. I think we have less than $1 per person, whereas some other large cities in Texas have an average of $5 or something, so it's 5 times more funding. And so I think in some ways that does kind of keep the visibility of the arts down in some way, just because we don't get as much funding. And arts organizations don't get as much funding for marketing or whatever they need. So I think that those are barriers.
Yeah.
Can I add something? 'Cause I have
Sure.
a thought about what Ariel said. I think one of the most important things that I have learned as a white woman who comes from privilege that Brandy is directly talking about. It's so true, Brandy. Someone is going to respond to maybe a sponsorship request from Near Southside Inc. differently than they would respond to one from Decolonizing the Music Room.
They've literally ignored the ones that you
Yeah.
led me. She's given me leads and they just
Ignore it. Yeah. So this is a direct example of racial privilege playing out in the arts. And I think as a white woman, I have learned that my responsibility is to get into spaces that make me uncomfortable, to attend events where I think the purpose of this event is not me. I'm not the audience that someone is catering to, and I need to be a part of that thing and be an observer of that experience so that I understand it better and can serve as an advocate. I need to get involved with Taylor in circles of elite money that I am so uncomfortable around. I think I am a poor kid from the South Side, and this is not my crew, but I have to learn the language that these people are using, and I have to hold my ground and make an impact on the requests that I have as though they are just as worthy and they are just as credible and they are just as impactful as the bigger, more polished, more professional ass in the room. And I have to learn from artists like Ariel who have put themselves out on a limb in some ways and been brave to do things in spaces that I don't fully understand, with groups that I am not a part of, with circles that I don't run in. And that experience enriches us all when we do it. And so I will tell you, I walked into the first Fort Worth African American Roots Music Festival and was a little bit uncomfortable because I thought, man, this room doesn't look like me. Well, good, Megan. Good. Finally, you have arrived in a room that is not exactly mirroring everything you know and believe, because what a learning experience that was to understand the richness of a culture that does not originate with me, and also puts me in a better position to be an advocate. And I challenge all of us to start small, like Taylor was saying, like Ariel was saying, like Brandy's saying, start small. Like, even if you cannot attend next year's Fort Worth African American Roots Festival, put it on your calendar so that you're aware of it and can tell other people, and buy a ticket to a thing you cannot attend because you believe it's important to exist, whether you are there or not. It does not have to be that you're only coming to this thing or funding it because you have something personally to gain. I think we all owe that to each other in ways. I have found that artists are the greatest supporters of other artists, and they're typically the ones buying the other people's artwork and supporting other people's practices. And so the way in which we create a tidal wave of support is to put small amounts of money in things that we know to be important and to make a plan for it. Next year's Fort Worth African American Roots Festival is going to be in March 16th, and so you can start saving your $45 right now. You can skip a couple coffees and do a couple things where you think, I would like to be a $100 supporter of the Fort Worth African American Roots Festival because I believe that it has cultural significance and importance. And it does not have to be that there's some $10,000 sponsor that you go out and secure to make a difference for Brandy. Invite 10 other friends. You could do that. But like, if everybody in this room invited 10 friends to put $100 on their goal list for what they're contributing to something new in the arts economy that they believe in, it would be a radical change in Fort Worth. I think sometimes we hope that there are rich people who sit on clouds in the sky that will come down and save us. And the truth is, I think we banding together can change the economic dynamic of what is offered culturally in Fort Worth and what is not, through supporting practices and believing in nonprofit and cultural programming.
And I don't want to pause. I want this vein of the discussion to keep going, but I also want to acknowledge there's some questions in the audience, and I want to make sure we get to those as well. So if you have a question, find a person with a microphone, go hang out while Ariel adds this one idea.
So I have, I think one thing to say on this, and that when I first came back to Fort Worth and was trying to establish myself in the community, I would be really scared, first of all, because I didn't know anyone. And I would go to all the openings, and I would walk into the room, and I wouldn't know anybody. And I would walk around in the space and look at the work. And after a few times of doing this, I met a few people. And then my network started to grow, and I started to form relationships. And out of those things, a lot of really positive things have happened. And I've been able to raise awareness about the arts in Fort Worth. But I think that for all of us that are here, that kind of thinking can also apply to maybe going to city council meetings and really getting to know the people that are making the policy decisions in the city that that directly influence how much funding the arts get. And I don't know how many of you have relationships with your city council members, but I encourage you to go and make an effort. Because it's really important that they know who we are and what we want. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, and so we have a question in the audience. I don't know who has the microphone out there. Or all right, use your theater voice.
I'll say, the city of Fort Worth has done an incredible job of recruiting growth to the city, whether it's new residents moving in at incredible numbers, new investment.
19,000 last year
Yes,
alone.
that's new investment coming in from a construction standpoint, which Ben knows better than any of us here with Burn Construction. And often the hook that is being used to secure this type of investment is an arts professional of some type. There is in the pitch for Fort Worth an arts and culture, this nebulous word of culture, that is used as the sales tool for why you want to live here, why you want to invest here. And so I think what I have seen is that there is a greater accountability. The arts community is holding those people making the pitch, which includes me, it includes Visit Fort Worth, it includes all of the kind of institutional partners at the Chamber of Commerce and other places to say, great, if you are using us to sell your product, then you better be paying us to get that job done. So it's not just taking us out on tour casually, but it's literally funding the careers. And I can give you a direct example of that. I want to do exactly what Brandy is saying. I want to pay the musicians who are playing the stages for Arts Goggle, and I don't want to be asking for favors, and I want to pay them what they ask for. If I say, what is your rate for a 50-minute performance? I want to know what it is honestly, and I want to not negotiate back and forth endlessly to nickel and dime this artist to death, but say, great, if your rate for a 50-minute performance is $550, then I would like to pay that. And so I made a commitment this year I would do that with artists, and then I took the quantity of money that I needed, which for one stage was $7,500, and I went to Visit Fort Worth and I said, guys, you're taking musicians out on tour. We're growing those musicians right here at home, and I need $7,500 to pay them to play Arts Goggle, and Visit Fort Worth sponsored that stage, right? And so those are direct impact moments of saying, like, I can't back out the other way around and say, I only have $3,000, so can this musician play for $50, or can somebody do a favor for me? Because one musician won't budge off their price and other people will waver and end up being hurt by the deal. And so I think sometimes, like, that's just one anecdotal example of how you, if you're in any level of power, you have any position of influence, you have to say it out loud. Yes, please.
And so her being able to say a number means that next year when you write your budget, that is your baseline in the budget. I'm seeing a lot of organizations and groups who front load all the other things into the budget and then ask artists what their rates are. You always ask artists what their rates are, but you have to have something that is a professional rate in your initial budget. And we can't be an afterthought. So if you're doing what Megan's doing, then next year Arts Goggle is going to have $7,500 as their budget and negotiate from there, not negotiate from not sure of anything or a very, very low number,
Yeah, you're so right, Randy. Like, I used to do it the other way around, where I would basically say, I think I need $5,000 for a stage. And then I would hope that after I'd paid for the stage and paid for the sound engineer and paid for the banners and paid for all the generators, that whatever little number was left, $800, would be enough for me to pay the musicians that would play that stage. What a back-asswards way to manage talent and the thing that really matters at the end of the day. And so now I'm finally a billion years into this job realizing that that is harming the artists that I work with, it is underserving the community that I care about, and it is creating an economic dynamic that will always hold artists' heads underwater, right? So it's like, do it the other way around, and I think that's actually how development has to work on the construction side. If you have projects that you've secured in Fort Worth and they've got budgets allocated towards design professionals and creatives to be part of that project, then you have to also hope that those construction budgets are working in similar ways. This tiny little concept actually scales at every level, whether you're building the A&M campus or you're building a stage at Arts Goggle, it's the very same concept.
Yes, and there's one gentleman in the blue over there who's very patiently been waiting for the chance to ask his question. Go ahead, sir.
I have more of like an ideological, like the way I've been working, way to contribute to it, but I know some people have some more practical applications beyond mine. But it's, those of you who are in the gate, like, first of all, I have to acknowledge there's a gate. It's a very, very thick wall gate. It's very, very white. And even when we look at our cultures, our Hispanic, Latina, Indigenous folks, you got to have a certain proximity to whiteness to even get in that or perform something that feels more comfortable in order to get in that. Those of you who have access to that have a responsibility, not a like if you want to or not, but an absolute responsibility to center the voices of people like that who are talking about their communities. Understand that the gate is thick and the gate is locked, and that when people are being shown Fort Worth, that is not what they're being shown. And you have a responsibility to do something about that. So making connections, it should not have to be on his community to break their backs so that they can get like just right inside the door. That is not equity. That is not reparative action. That is more that colonial thing to have to be able to fit in the right way and know the right people to talk to do that. So I'm putting the onus on the folks who have the privilege and are in there already. And it's the white folks, it's my people who know they're privileged but are not reaching outside the gate. It should not be on that community. Their space should be sharing and having their lived experiences validated and having the resources there, not on him having to figure out how to do even more work when communities like that, like the indigenous people were here before us. The Latina community is an essential backbone of this community. They should not have to be trying to figure out more ways to put the puzzle pieces together. That's my thought on it.
So I know there are a lot of questions that are left, but I know that people are also hungry, and there's a lot more programming that we need to get to today. But I encourage you all to keep the conversation going outside of these walls after today, certainly at city council meetings. And yeah, please give it up for our wonderful panelists today.